thing an orthopedic surgeon won't let you do is that cane with the 4.
A hurricane?
Yeah, they don't want to use. They don't want you to use it.
This thing is just a weapon. It's just big but it works. I've been going up and down stairs.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm getting there.
That's good.
You're ready to go whenever you're ready, sir.
Okay. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Board of Finance for the town of Summers on this 24th day of March 2022. Special meeting. Members present are William Salka, Joseph Tolosano, Ralph Williams, Kathy Devlin, and Michael Parker. Tonight we have an opportunity to further discuss the budgets as presented. If any of the presenters have any comments and you'd like to present them to the Board of Finance, I'd like you to do that if you would now.
Good evening, everybody.
Hi, Glenn.
I have a handout, to share with you. This was at the request from you, Mr. Parker, at the last meeting for us to go back and take a look at some items that possibly we could take a look at transferring out of the Board of Education budget and to be transferred into the ARPA funds. And I'll preface this with two things. The first thing is, when we did this, we looked at what are these costs that would either be one time next year or at end of life, that we wouldn't renew them in the future years. And the second one was we didn't know what would be eligible. We're going to save that for my esteemed colleague to the left to give us the good news on all of that. So we were able to come up with about $134,000 of transfers, potential transfers out of the operating budget. Some of them are directly related to COVID, some are not. So we thought we'd throw everything out there. Obviously, the first one we believe is directly related to COVID because we're following CDC guidelines to the extent we can with increasing our HVAC systems. Normally we wouldn't do it. We haven't done that in the past. But that's obviously, as I mentioned at the last meeting, is putting a strain on the electrical costs. Last year we were over by $100,000. We kind of said budgeted $50,000 for next year, so that's one thing that we were hoping that we could transfer to ARPA. We have severance payments that are due in 22-23 due to retirements and contractual obligations of $46,000. Again, a one-time cost for next year. There is various instructional administrative software that will be phased out that are directly related to COVID, and will be phased out after next year. And then we have the $15,000 in the one-time legal fees due to us having to do collective bargaining with 3 units next year. So all in all, we're able to come up with 134. Obviously, there are more things that we could possibly transfer, but those will be recurring costs, and they'll just have to come back in future budgets. So we didn't include them on here because we don't want to create another financial cliff.
Right.
So.
Okay.
And these will all fit in those ARPA rubrics you were telling me about this morning?
Actually, if you have a little packet in your packet, it's the stapled one. So I'll preface with Brian and Stephanie and myself and Mike all met on Monday. We left that meeting with an understanding that we thought some of these things might be able to be covered. I'm sorry, that was on Tuesday. On Monday, I had a meeting with U.S. Treasury going over the final rule and understanding the final rule and what is allowable, what isn't allowable. It was probably the most exciting 90 minutes of my life. So then we had the meeting on Tuesday. We discussed. I was okay with a couple of things, but wanted to do some more research on it. the one that jumped out to me immediately that I said there's no way is the $46,000 in severance payments. It's very specific in the final rule that nothing involving retirements or pension payments, these monies cannot be used for that. But in the packet, the first page, the key objectives: fight the pandemic, support families and businesses struggling with public health and economic impacts, maintain vital services amid declines in revenue, and build a strong, resilient, equitable recovery by making investments that support long-term growth and opportunity. I'll remind you, all of these are straight from the Treasury. I didn't create any of these slides. Page 2, the 4 eligible use categories: public sector revenues, public health and economic response, premium pay, water, sewer, broadband infrastructure. So right out the gate, it kind of looking at those proposed items, none of those really fit into any of these 4 eligible use categories. The one that could be kind of on the fence would be the public sector revenues. Page 3 goes on to say that you can spend on government services up to the revenue loss amount. However, it gives you categories of what the government services are allowed, such as construction of schools and hospitals, road building and maintenance, other infrastructure, health and other services, environmental remediation, and provisions of police, fire, and other public safety services. Again, none of those really kind of fall into those categories. The restrictions on use, and this is where it gets a little dicey on a lot of these. And these go for the town side as well. And I actually reached out to the town of Windsor Locks today. Probably spent collectively 2 hours emailing back and forth with their finance director on their interpretation of this as well. The final rule maintains the prohibition on states and localities for using SLFRF, which is state local fiscal recovery funds, to directly or indirectly offset a reduction in tax revenue. So I was like, well, what does that mean? So I reached out to Windsor Locks and spoke with them. They have the same interpretation of it as me, is if something is part of your tax base, an expense is part of your tax base. If it is a electrical cost, a legal fee, something of that nature, using these monies to offset the tax portion of that would be a restriction of use. Clarifies that the prohibition on pension funds applies to all recipients, and it may not be used for debt service or replenishing rainy day funds or financial reserves. So we couldn't just put it into the kitty and say it's money. The key concept is to be focused on projects, closely related activities towards a common purpose or goal, a new or existing service or investment, funded in whole or in part by the ARPA funding, SLFRF, to align to one expenditure category only. Recipients have flexibility to define their projects, but must provide a sufficient level of detail to be able to report on specific activities for the project. And additional programmatic data may be required by project, depending on the expenditure category that is selected for use. The last 2 pages are the approved final rule expenditure categories. And so most of these are capital investment, payroll costs for public health and safety, mental health, substance use services. You'll notice in section 2, small business economic assistance, aid to nonprofits. We don't have tourism or travel, so we can't give aid to that. Other economic support. There is some education assistance in here, which kind of falls under the umbrella of the $200,000 that we have given to the schools already for social, emotional, and mental health services, academic services, early learning services, so forth. In the initial the interim final ruling, there were two other categories that do not appear on these sheets. One was a category 4. It was premium pay for public sector employees and grants to employers. That has been removed in the final rule. The pay for public sector employees is now in public health section. It has to be directly for public health, safety, and other public sector staff responding to the COVID-19 crisis. And category 6 was government services, and that has been removed from the expenditure categories in the final ruling. And that was, in my opinion, to keep people from just spending it on general fund expenditures and so forth, but they didn't really give a reason why. They did say that if the monies had been used for those costs before the final rule was issued, so if last year you used ARPA funds to pay for general fund expenses, that there would be no penalty. However, now that the final rule has been issued, you would be under penalty, and you would have to pay every penny back to the federal government that you use for an improper expense. So, with all of that said, I don't think any of the $134,000 is eligible at all. That's my opinion. I would not recommend using it for any of those services.
Well, what about, he's got a $72,000 for COVID-related deferments due to cuts, or $51,000 for HVAC improvements for COVID.
So the HVAC improvements are,
I think there's a $400,000 Mabel B. Avery enhancement for HVAC, or is it?
It was in the report that came back, there is a $750,000 potential expenditure to replace the current 20 rooftop units with new ones. So that's, but those, I'm not sure I would go with those right now, because I think that we still have a good 10 years of life on them. So it probably would be premature to, we could, but they got a good 10 years according to the vendor who services them.
So any of these other adjustments that are technology? We were
Right.
Technology to boost your securities, to boost your infrastructure, yes.
It's to boost learning, which was
And
challenged
and,
during that.
and some of the
pandemic.
and that's why I said some of the educational stuff that is in here, if you consider it an academic service, yeah, maybe you could probably get that through. But as far as the infrastructure for broadband and IT, they're really focused on last mile projects and other broadband projects, not necessarily buying computers.
For example, on the page 9 of your detailed budget, Brian,
Which, let me make sure.
it's 213 instructional salaries. You've got an item, and it's 10-100, 2581, 213, 111, 025,
So you have
822 intervention program, $408,000 increase. That falls directly within the guidelines. I know you'd like to make sure it's repetitive, that those folks stay on, but that's $408,000 that's clearly within the ARPA designation.
that.
Salaries.
That intervention program, that line item accounts for 2 new intervention programs, as well as some of our current intervention staff. So I'll leave it up to Brian if we could take that entire 408, or if we could just take the 2 intervention programs that we're bringing on board, probably as a direct causation of COVID. I would say that's something that possibly.
I know that I've had a chance to go through these restrictions before you handed them over, and I went through this, and I don't have the insight that you do, but it seemed to me that there was that one could find something in excess of $1 million in COVID-related attention.
I agree with you, but I think that what we tried to do is say, okay, we can take $1 million out this year, but guess what? We're coming back with a normal increase next year, plus
The million.
plus the million, because it's an ongoing recurring
Right.
cost,
Yeah.
and I think that.
But here's my concern. I'll be as candid with you as you can about it. Once we increase your budget by 6%, there's no going back.
Right.
On the other hand, if we use ARPA money to the extent that it's available, then we haven't pumped that budget up, we haven't established an artificial floor, and we get to look at it again next year. And if we need to allocate more money, we phase it in.
That's up to you. I mean, up to
It's
you.
an approach.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
mean, I'm not trying to say that that's the only approach, but it's an approach.
And it absolutely is. I can't disagree with that.
And I think, well, we can talk about it amongst the members of the board, but I just wanted you to. In other words, I'm not trying to say no, you can't have the money to do these things to take care of our kids. I think you should have it.
Thank you.
I think we should, to the maximum extent possible, though, draw it down out of the ARPA funds instead of building up the floor in the budget.
So if you're okay with that, as a group, I can certainly go back and take another look at this with a different lens, as to okay, these are COVID related, could be COVID related expenses, but expect them to reoccur in future budgets.
Well, it becomes for us a balancing act.
Yeah.
As our reserves grow and
Sure.
maybe we get a tax increase this year, they're talking about a recession, money's getting more expensive. We have to factor all that in and try to level it out. But I think we're several months into this ARPA funding and we still don't have a clear vision of how we're spending that money. Maybe the other towns were smarter and they blew it out the door, and they didn't get restrictions like we did.
No, I mean the thing. Even talking to Windsor Locks, they got a little bit more than us. They got like 3.8. They've only allocated to date. They've only allocated $400,000
so
of the
they're
money.
very
So
similar
they're
to us.
basically the same boat as us. They're playing it safe. They're waiting for. They waited for the final rule to come in. They're developing a project list. But their project list that she shared with me is very similar to ours, creating a small business economic assistance for nonprofits and small businesses, creating food pantry programs, creating household assistance, offering rebates basically to residents and offering them cash in hand that isn't, it's never owed back to maybe help with the crisis of people who got stuck at home for 9 months and didn't, work. And here's something to give to people. And I think that's kind of where this money is supposed to be diverted to, not to. And honestly, I mean, if you had an expense in the current year budget, in fiscal 22 budget, that's also in the fiscal 23 budget, to cut it and use an ARPA fund for it is step one against the rule.
And we don't want to do that. We want to focus on new things that, for example, and we're talking about Brian, he's on the hot seat at the moment, but new expenditures that he has that are clearly directed towards trying to
Right, so but
tutor
looking at
kids.
like that intervention program,
Yeah.
it's there currently. It's at 337. He's saying it's going to grow 408. It already exists. It's already an expense.
Yeah,
To
but
cut
100
it-
It's growing as the result of the pandemic.
Right, it's growing as a result
You
of
could
it.
throw $200,000 of that 400 increase could be directly related to salaries and health benefits of the 2 new positions that we put forward that are not currently in the budget.
And the positions, I could say, yeah, I could see that, because they fall under the social, emotional, mental health service. But I mean, I warn you to be very careful with it. We'll never see money like this again, and to just use it to prevent a tax increase is a bad idea. We set ourselves up for failure last year. We're now staring down the barrel of what happened last year, and we keep kicking the can. Guess next year we're going to be sitting there doing the
decision
same.
last year as a failure, quite frankly.
No, I don't think so.
No, I
don't
thought we
think
did a
so.
pretty good job.
I mean, we ended up with $750 $50,000 surplus in the capital account, in the general fund. That's hardly a failure.
We didn't return anything, and we used a lot of monies rather than having, and we reduced taxes. That's what I'm saying is, if we went 3/4 of a mil lower than we were the year before. So now we've got to get back to that If we didn't use any fund balance, we're looking at 1.75 mils right now just to get a budget. And so that's what I'm telling you. We grew and we chopped and we reduced taxes in return. If we would have left it flat, we probably wouldn't be in the situation now. We'd probably be looking at a $0.5 mil tops.
Well, we're also sitting on very healthy reserves that are.
We are right now.
Taxpayers have already paid that into the town.
We are.
And that's their money, frankly.
Yeah.
No, I agree.
That's where all this balancing comes out. If we had a clearer picture of where, I've been saying this for months, where this ARPA money was going, we could make more long-term decisions about where we're headed here. And it's very difficult to do, So.
While we have Brian here, does anybody have any other questions for him at the moment? I'd really appreciate it if, and I think everybody else on the board would, if you'd take a look at it through that different lens.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay?
Yep.
And,
No problem. I don't know of many new initiatives. I'll go scouring through it again, but I know, as I said, close to probably maybe $200,000 for those new positions between salaries and benefits was something that we could start off with, if we're agreeable.
Well,
with that.
I'm happy to send you my notes if you want to see what I have.
Absolutely.
And you can say, "Hey, Mike, you're all wet with that one. That doesn't mean anything."
Nope, send them on.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to take a look at them.
Very well.
Okay.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
Anybody else? Mr. Kinney, do you have any comment on the town side?
Nothing that I didn't address last week.
Okay. Is there anybody else in attendance who wants to say anything before I open it up for discussion amongst the members of the board? Okay. I think we've all just had a fairly straight discussion with Brian about what we're looking for in terms of direction. Does anyone have any thoughts, any further comments about it, or you want to wait and see what he comes up with? Yeah. I put some numbers together just as a point of departure, and I would appreciate it for the purposes of my discussion. This is a lawyer, not an accountant, putting these numbers together, so
We have an extra one. for
I've got tons of them.
And for maybe you give the superintendent one.
Yeah. Does anybody else want one?
Yeah, next one for Bob.
Yep, sure. They're not that erudite, there's,
Thank you.
okay. What I did was I tried to think about this budget, understanding that the people who prepare the budgets know what the expenditures are, and they know what they need in order to run the town. And I tried to look at it in terms of what would be a doable percentage increase. And I took the right-hand three columns, or you see at the top it says 103, 103.5, 104. Those represent a 3% increase in the budget over last year, a 3.5% increase, and a 4% increase. Follow me? Mm-hmm. And then I looked at what the Board of Ed net gain would be on a 103% budget, and so their budget would increase by $757,000, for example, and that would leave them, based on their proposed budget, a shortfall of $747,000. So I did that for the Board of Ed, the town, and then I plugged in the debt service and the capital amounts, which are static numbers, I think, based on what Brian has told us.
Yep.
So and then we have a combo expense of if you're using the 3% increase, we have a combo expense of $36,495,000. Or if it's a 3.5% increase, it's $36,663,000, and if it's a 4% increase budget, it's $36,831,000. If you follow along, then we show the combo net gain and then the combo unfunded port. The delta is the difference between the expenses less the revenue. So if we did 103% increase, okay, we'd have expenses less revenue of 588, and that number increases. The greater the budget, the greater that amount becomes. The notion is that the combo unfunded is the amount, the 723,080 is the amount that we have to dig out of the ARPA money. Okay, in other words, at a 4% increase, we would have to dig out of the ARPA money 723,080, or they'd have to cut budgets by that amount, one way or the other. Okay, so when we say at 104, they'd have to find 723,080. Okay. The notion is that if we took, I guess I have down here, fund balance, if we took 700,000 out of the reserves, we'd still be ahead of the game in terms of our maintaining an adequate balance in the general fund for bond purposes. We'd still be in the healthy category. And in order to balance the budget, we'd have to raise taxes by about $300,000, or maybe 0.3 mil. So, with those figures in mind, you now can fiddle with the math any way you want to. If you want to reduce the amount of unfunding further, then to the extent that you reduce the unfunded amount by $100,000, you get to raise the mill rate by 1/10 of a point.
Yeah.
Okay? It's pretty much that simple. So if Brian and Tim Keeney could come up with the 723,000 in cuts or ARPA usage, then we could walk out of here with applying 700,000 from the general fund from last year and having an increase of about 0.3. Okay?
My only concern with a 0.3 mil rate is, we have to start generating enough revenue for the future of how this
Right.
is it's like a seesaw here at some point.
So then you have the opportunity to try to plug in a couple of extra points on top of that. You figure that if you were at 0.5, 0.6,
Yeah, I was
even if you
thinking
doubled it,
0.5 or 0.75.
there probably wouldn't be a lot of objection, I don't think, in the towns for that
As
level
long as
of
we're under
increase.
a mill, we're almost but where is that sweet spot? We all are in this together, and how much of the ARPA can we use?
Yeah.
I think we're being somewhat very conservative. I don't disagree with what you're saying. It's
know-
a drastic change from
Right.
what we were hearing
No,
from the
it is.
CFO 2 weeks ago, where it's a blank check. You
Yeah.
can write the whole $3 million to whoever.
I know on the town side, I don't think there's anything in the general fund budget that can be covered at all with ARPA funds. None of it qualifies.
Not even the social services program for youth development.
That's already grant funded. That's not even taxpayer dollars. That's already being funded by the state.
Well, she was going to expand some of those programs. When we
She's
were at CIP.
she's expanding it, but she's applying for a federal grant before she expands it. She's waiting to get word. She'll know in August if she gets that federal grant. That would be $125,000. If she receives that, then she'll expand the program. And our cost increase on the town side is hauling trash. It's fuel cost. It's nothing that
23.5%.
is, ARPA monies. It's adding a land use director that was eliminated by the previous administration. Realistically, to cut $200,000, you're getting rid of positions. It's what it boils down to on the town side.
I think the warnings that you raise are not unreasonable, but I think that when dealing with these monies, I think you can afford to take some risk. The worst case scenario is
Pay
if
it
you
back.
really screw it back, you pay it
Pay
back.
them back.
It's a cheap loan.
Yeah, it's free money for a year or two until they
Yeah.
audit you. And I'm not saying that's the right approach.
I'm not saying that that's where we want to go, but I
No,
mean that's
but I think we're
the
being-
downside.
We
Isn't
really, I keep saying it,
terrible.
we really need to know where this $3.2 million is going, and we don't.
Yeah.
And if we can't spend it, we should send it back and get beyond it, because it's holding all of this up, in my opinion.
I'd like to look at the use of that money with a wide lens, understanding that there really isn't a lot of risk on the downside. And if we had to pay it back, it's an interest-free loan. And I don't want to take.
Is it
I don't want to
an entry
cross a
loan, or are there
line.
penalties?
What's that?
Are there penalties?
Are there
They
penalties?
haven't said.
No. I don't want to cross a line that's clear, but if there's an opportunity to use that money to support our budget, why not?
I was just gonna check something.
Of course, part of my thinking about the ARPA money is I still would love, because the broader HVAC needs of the school system, ultimately we're going to need a bond issue to be sure. But I would love to find a lot of that is spawned by COVID. Now, you and I talked earlier today, and there's a certain amount of beat the clock going on here, where you have to commit funds, commit and or spend funds by 2026?
Had to be committed by 24 and it's spent by 26, December
Yeah.
of 24 and 26.
Yeah. So I'd love to see as much of that money as we could use to reduce there's going to have to be a bond issue in any event. I'd like to see the bond cost of that reduced. That strikes me as the most obvious COVID-related expense we're looking at.
Yeah, and
And it's the one that doesn't involve creating positions or whatever, which we suddenly find we still have when the money runs out.
yep, and we have looked at that. We've begun to explore it. Bonding does take time. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's not an overnight process. Our hope was to start to put together a package. I know the school is just the HVAC system alone, anywhere from $4.5 to $6 million just to complete the entire HVAC project. There's major renovations that need to happen at the firehouse. There's major renovations that need to happen at the police department.
Community center.
A community center has been discussed. So that there are projects out there that I don't think projects are the problem. It's getting everything in line, getting it voted, getting it passed through,
Yeah.
getting the monies, starting the A&E. I mean, when Brian and I discussed the architect and engineering portion of just the air conditioning system or the HVAC system, it'd probably be about a year. So we're talking this time next year before the engineering studies even back, before we know how much money to even go out to bond for. So by then you're in you're March of 23. Now you finally have your study. Now you're not until November of 23 before you're getting the appropriation. Then you're into 24. Now you have 11, 12 months to say, okay, we're going to spend it on this. No way you're getting the money by June, July to do the first school.
So what's the answer?
We've started to discuss a lot of the ARPA funds. Mike put together a list. I've been working on it. We've got about $400,000 in IT that we can use, but we got to go to governance first on that.
So what's the difference between your IT and his IT?
Ours is actually increasing cybersecurity beefing up right now. I mean, you know pretty well, our cybersecurity is about as bad as it gets. Moving things to the cloud so that there are actual securities in place. Office 365 is probably one of the most secure servers out there. Getting rid of an Exchange server that's just sitting in the down there could easily be hacked. There's so many things with the Exchange servers.
Are you in any of that? You're already in the cloud.
He's already in on all that. His is replacing computers. Upgrading our accounting software. The accounting software we used was developed in 1987. I was 5. I'm turning 40 now, and I'm still using a software from then.
So you're identifying projects. Is what
We
you're
are
saying,
identifying projects.
that we can execute in the time frame.
Yep.
And do you think that you've covered enough with escalation of costs? When I think about what just happened at the transfer station, I think even Todd's going to have a problem because paving is going up.
Absolutely.
Right now, we tried desperately in our town, in my community to do and it went up 17% last week alone, and it may not end there.
Yep.
Those are the things that I worry. I don't know why we can't take it a little bit more.
But he's got about $800,000 of the current bond. He's got about $800,000 of it remaining. He originally had a list at the end of paving season last year, before costs really started to spike. He had a list of he was going to do this, and this in the upcoming year with the remaining funds. That list has shrunk drastically because of the increased cost. It went from another 4.5 miles of road to about 1.5 miles, and then he's going to have to start throwing in the state monies, throwing in the transfers in from general funds, just to try and get to where we thought he was going to be with just the bond funds.
One of the things that I know is
bad.
that we met. I met with Brian over a year ago about the HVA system in the schools to start that process, and to find out that you still think it's 3 years away. I know that there are all kinds of problems, but I think that HVAC system in the schools is the most important thing.
I agree with you completely.
To make sure that the kids are protected there.
Like I said,
And
if we could
I
get
think that
money,
project needs some leadership. It needs some.
and even if we
it
could
needs
get
some
money
butt kicking
in
to get that
2024,
forward.
the summer of 2024 is out for getting any start on the projects. Because we would most likely not even be able to go to the market until about the summer, so we'd be getting the cash in around then. So first school's probably summer of 25. And Brian and Mike and Stephanie and myself all discussed this, and we looked at the project timeline, and it can get done. You're absolutely right. And does it need to get done? Absolutely.
Then let's get it done. Let's amp it up.
We told him. So when you were first appropriated the funds for the study, we did 85,000, thinking the study was going to be that. The study was only 15, so we still have 70 of that. We told him to start the A&E process, get an engineer, start. Brian told us he thinks it's going to be a year before that study comes back.
I would think that we did an initial consultation with our current vendor, and we said we need a best estimate or a good faith estimate to do that study. And he came back with the study alone for all 3 of the schools would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000. So we just got that back yesterday, so I haven't had to do that. Now, we'd have to put that out on the street to bid it. But as soon as we get that back, we have to be ready to, when they do the study, we have to be in place to immediately go to execution of the project, because with the cost of everything going up, you don't want to do the study on it. We're going to wait 1.5 years for when the bond is issued, and then that study has to be redone unless we put a 15 to 20% contingency in it because of the cost of everything. So we can start it. It's a matter of we have to talk a little bit further. When is this town ready to possibly pull the trigger on a potential bond for it?
I think we need to go. I think that's my sense. And
The longer you wait on the bond, the more expensive the money's going to get.
Oh, I agree completely.
I think we need to amp it up. And if it means further discussions amongst us all to make sure that we're all on the same page, I think everybody here is willing to participate in that.
We can take a look at putting a bid spec out on the street within the next, couple of weeks for an A&E study.
Yeah,
And, I mean, that might be, if it's $500,000, that might be one of the projects that is funded by the ARPA fund to reduce the bond.
Yeah.
And there isn't a state contract you can grab for that study?
There could be. I'd have to take a look at that. I
But
don't know
that
I'm sure there.
that firm has probably got a client list of mile long.
I'm sure there is. But sometimes state contracts are not the best prices out there.
Yeah.
There you go.
But
Well,
again,
yeah,
going through a bid
schools.
process will take 6 to 8 weeks. So that brings us over the summer, and then if we could get a vendor in here, I don't know how long the study would take. I threw out a year, just because I know that there's potential electrical upgrade issues that they're going to have to do at the elementary school. I think the other 2 schools could probably handle it, but the elementary is the oldest school in the school system. And it's probably woefully inadequate to handle such an upgrade of an electrical system. So that's why it will take a year. It's just not a simple study, as we all know. It's okay, rip and replace, but we have to take a look at what's above the ceiling and in the circuit boxes.
Probably better than not doing.
So for the issue at hand, we're gonna need hard numbers of what we can take out of this ARPA for this fiscal year.
For the general
Notwithstanding-
fund budget.
And I know what your definition is, and we have ours, and Ryan's got his, and I'm sure Tim's got his,
Yeah.
but
I don't think there's anything on the town side that qualifies. I mean, there may be stuff in the Board of Ed side.
well, I
Because we
identified a
didn't-
few,
we
and I'll
didn't-
send you,
I mean,
I'll send you the ones that I identified, and you can tell me what's
All right.
wrong with those,
I mean,
okay?
some of the repairs to the firehouse in this fiscal year, that's emergency services, that would,
That's all in the capital stuff, though. That's already gone through CIP. It's part
Yeah,
of the capital
we did
proposed
it.
budget.
And a lot of that's already ARPA.
And we flagged ARPA for a lot of stuff
Yeah.
in the capital budget.
okay, you're right.
And
I should
there's
know that.
the capital budget alone, I think, and then this one doesn't show it. My larger breakdown does, but I think there was like 530,000 of ARPA funds being used in capital this year to avoid leasing and so forth.
Yeah, I have that in front of me.
All right.
It's contracted
Can I
marketing,
add
but it's-
something here?
Yes.
I'm a lifelong resident, Ambleback 2304 Bridges Road. And I have been listening here, my first time at a finance board meeting. I just wonder why we're always so penny wise and pound foolish in this community. It seems to me that we have some good projects that need to be addressed, and we're always backing down on them. Cybersecurity is so critical in this town, and we are so behind on it, as well as what's going on in the schools. I don't mind paying more. I'm a taxpayer. I don't mind. If it's going to give us better cybersecurity and what's going on, what we need at school. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome, thanks. Is there anything further at the moment, Joe?
No, thanks, Bill.
All right. I think we've already talked about the ARPA projects at the moment. You want to look at minutes for February 22nd. This is a special meeting anyway. I don't think we can approve
You
it.
can. We've actually got clarification. We had FOI training back in September, I think it was, and that was one of the questions I asked was, can we do minutes at a special meeting? He said, you absolutely can, as long as they're on the agenda and each one is listed.
Okay, so with that, and what kind of a grade did you get in that course after you were done?
I passed. It wasn't with flying colors, but I did
Okay.
pass.
But, I mean, it's sometimes important to know. February 22nd, 2022.
I read them.
Any comments?
Move to approve.
Okay. And then the other set of, did you have one, Ralph?
I was going to second that. That's all.
And then March 15th, 2022.
Motion.
Motion seconded by Ralph Williams.
If you insist.
All in, what?
If you insist.
I do. I want to try to get you into the record, Ralph. Okay, I know you're reticent. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, motion carries. Everybody is free to go until
Until
you
summer.
return again to meet with your parole
Now,
officer.
are we meeting again?
yeah.
Are we meeting again on Tuesday?
So when do you guys want to meet again? So to give you an idea.